So we talk about putting people over projects. People are eternal and projects are temporal. So how do we operationalize that as a funder or a mentor? Do we really say, oh, you know what, I care about this person more? People who are creating businesses that are interested in community, not just how do we do this cheaper, faster, and more separate. I think there's gonna be opportunities for the Christian leader who cares about their people more and more.
Bold visionaries, faithful disruptors. Some call them crazy, but they are called to create. Under his power, for his glory. The Faith-Driven Entrepreneur Podcast.
Welcome back to the Faith-Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. One of the things that we're not good about as entrepreneurs is taking a moment to pause. This is one of those moments. We get a chance in today's episode with our friend Dave Blanchard to pause, to reflect and see what is God doing in this moment? What are some of the things he's up to? And what are some of the things that he's calling us as faith-driven entrepreneurs, as redemptive entrepreneurs to build and think about differently? Let's get started with today's conversation. So one of the things everybody thinks about at end of year or somewhere during the year is like, you got to write a letter, a thesis, a statement, a call to arms, a call to action. So many different words is what we could call it.
Sure.
Sometimes I feel like people are writing those like ChatGPT style, like it's obligation. But one of my favorite things is looking at the letter that you write every year to summarize the chaos that is entrepreneurship. How much do you enjoy writing that letter in summary every year?
Well, I love it and I hate it.
Okay.
I love that there is a creative deadline that gives me a chance to speak and write to a community that is, by God's grace, interested in what we have to say at Praxis. And I consider that a great privilege. I think at the same time, writing is a beast. And for most of us who do that in the world, and I consider myself a lowercase author versus a uppercase author, it's still a challenge, and it's a gift to have people around you who can edit you well, which I'm fortunate to have at Praxis. And but you commit yourself to the process and hope something comes out at the end that's worth sharing. And at least one time a year, something does. So.
Oh, indeed it does. It's one of my favorites, and it's one of those moments I think that as entrepreneurs we're so much thinking about like what's next, right?
Yeah.
Like we're thinking big windshield, small rear view mirror. We're not taking those times to reflect. But it's one of those healthy moments where as a movement that we take stock of kind of what's happened. And entrepreneurship's always unpredictable, but gosh, this has been a year of a lot of unpredictable stuff.
Yeah.
When you step back and you look at this year, walk us through some of the thoughts. What are some of the things that kind of stand out in that letter that you put together?
Yeah, well, I think, this has been an interesting year in the sense that almost everyone has been affected in some way, but often in very different ways. So we have a nonprofit portfolio that, some of them are directly losing federal grants, for example, that they were planning on or had been committed to them. And so they're laying off half of their team or rethinking how they do their work. But for others, that's not their line of work, but the philanthropy is going towards that gap that's been created.
You got quite a gallery there chiming in there. Yeah. if anybody can hear that.
So you have shifting funding going towards holes that are leaving new holes, and so there's everyone's kind of figuring out, how do I adapt to these circumstances? What's kind of around the corner? I think at its worst, there's been times where there's a lot of rumors around of what's coming next, and geopolitically, et cetera, and how do we anticipate that? And that can get into kind of fear, honestly, versus waiting and seeing and planning and plotting. I think, of course, at the same time, you just have continued desire, I think, in the world and in the country for faith expressions that are winsome, connected, the gospel in action. And so in some sense, we have this really great opportunity that's been created through, I would say, the chaos of the last 5 years, really. And we're starting to see in the data people being open to faith. I was having a conversation just a couple days ago with a young man who's at a church that's doing well in Los Angeles, and he said, I have all these friends who come up to me and they say, can I go to church with you? And they're not Christians, but they're longing for community, connection, presence with people. And so it's exciting to see people entrepreneurially responding to that as well, both in the sense of I think that's also going to trickle into the marketplace and people who are creating businesses that are interested in community, not just how do we do this cheaper, faster, and more separate. I think there's going to be opportunities for the Christian leader who cares about their people more and more.
It feels like that there, one of the things I appreciate about what you said is there's this desire not to just say what we're building, but how we're building. I think we've both gone through probably varying different experiences of faith driven, and in Praxis is maybe there was a focus on like the redemptive venture and stepping in to something that's broken and building something that's good. But there was a renewed emphasis this year focusing on how we build. Where do you feel like that? How did you come to that place where it's kind of like, hey, there's two twin engines here?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting journey, at least for me and my thinking on this. But I think in some ways, when we started Praxis, we thought that the faith and work conversation, which is really important, had really activated a lot of the sort of best practices of organizational operations, and hey, let's make sure we're being generous with our company, and let's make sure we're having a Bible study, let's make sure we're not burning people out, and those are critical things. I think at a minimum ethical baseline, if not more. And so a lot of our galvanizing energy for starting Praxis was how do we make sure that Christians have a seat at the table of solving the world's greatest problems and really getting engaged in that work, and feeling like we're so often just, figuring out what's happened and responding maybe 10 years later. And so that's the what we build in the world. Now I think these things are intertwined, of course, but seeing so much of our witness is actually the sort of day-to-day charism of individuals, ventures, and a community of people where the world is encountering exploitative leadership in different ways over and over, and saying, hey, that leaves a lot to be desired. Where can I look for people who are doing something different, who value people in a different way, who care about individuals and what the world looks like, not just at the issue level, but at the day-to-day workplace level. And so I think it's an interesting comeback around. Of course, we're always hoping that those things are fused together, right?
Yeah, I think it's a coming back around to it. As you said, it was there in the faith and work conversation. It was like to balance kind of some of the conversation you go to, like, okay, what's the model of the venture? But now I think as this faith and work conversation becomes somewhat, I don't want to say normative, but like the distinguishable traits of multiple places are going to be key. And so I think that code, as you kind of use the language, we had used like the marks of a faith-driven entrepreneur, like there's need for a code to define what it is so that people can detect, what's the bumper sticker and what's really an authentic version of what this is.
Yeah.
What are some of the big things that stood out to you as you guys went through the process? It looked like there was like 8 kind of core principles for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, having a community that practices what it preaches is the first thing. I think we probably experienced the most sort of long-term damage to individual people and to institutions when they're found out to be very, very different than the messaging that they've been sending underneath the hood. And that somehow the means justify the ends in those cases. That's true, of course, in enterprise and
and you see that, I mean, like Enron, like that's a very specific example. I mean, you had people, leading Bible study and yet committing large-scale fraud.
Right.
And like, I mean, we're not talking about subtle things. We're talking some big, major things.
Yeah.
But it is something we have to be mindful of, right? Because like as it becomes, I don't know, I might say popular, and you use language from everything from your marketing materials to your LinkedIn profile. Yeah. Like people are going to have to know, like, man, what is that test to know that somebody really passionately believes something? Yeah. And this is a tough thing for leaders who in organizational context get in some ways continually abstracted from the day-to-day operations as they're managing people who they hope are deploying these things, these practices that they preach. So I think you really have to say as a leader, okay, if we're going to practice what we preach, we've got to invest in it so that we can form
the people around us who are in our organization or our communities so that they can then believe it. And we also have to curate that. So, I think it's, I forget who said this, but basically the culture is not codified until someone loses their job because they violated it. That's a harsh thing to say in some ways. And that's not the first move, of course. But until it's real, until it's like, oh, we actually don't accept counterculture in a negative sense here on this point. You can't do it that way here. It doesn't often feel as tangible. So I think that's job one.
Yeah. Well, I love how you led off with that, and then you did it through the redemptive frame to say like, hey, this is something that we've got to not only talk about in theory, like on a post, read in a book, but it's something that we have to build out.
The Faith-Driven Entrepreneur Conference. Here's to faithful disruptors, the ones who solve real problems and take righteous risks. God didn't give you that idea to play it safe, but isolation kills vision, and comfort crushes calling. That's why every September, over 4,000 entrepreneurs across 100 countries are gathering, in person, online, or in watch parties around the world. 3 hours, battle-tested founders, zero fluff. This isn't just hype, it's a movement. For more information, visit faithdrivenentrepreneurconference.org. Stop wondering if you're alone and start remembering why you started.
What are some of the other things that, as you guys were saying, gosh, what are we prioritizing this code?
Yeah. Well, I think as a Christian community, the other really, I would say, top thing in there is how we see our identity and our affiliations. We've got to see ourselves as part of the kingdom of God first. I think actually the world, we're, naturally, humanly, we find the different things that we are all affiliated with. We find friends who like the same things, or people who have the same background, or have the same beliefs at times about certain issues in the world. But if those things become our first identity, if we say, I'm a this first, and then I go to church, or I'm a this first, and then I follow Jesus, that is actually, I think, a fracturing of the unity of the church. At the end of the day, we don't see it like that. It kind of creeps up, and sometimes there's multiple things that are participating in that. And then we actually then say, well, does the church believe what I believe? And then I'll choose whether my identity is in the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is messy. We see that all through history, but it doesn't change, I think, the order of our affiliation that then can set the table for so many other things that are downstream from that, in even how the fruit of the Spirit is really our operating model for our lives and our engagement with each other. It's, cliche. A lot of times we come back to these, the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. But are we, one, pursuing the Spirit, inviting the Spirit into our conversation and community, and then inventorying ourselves and saying, do we see the fruit of the Spirit in our personal lives first, and then in the way that we are doing life in our organizations?
What do you think is the biggest canary in the coal mine for that when our identity gets out of whack? What's the first signs of when you guys are working with people that are going through it, or just interacting with people? What's the first tell that you feel like you run into?
Yeah. What comes to mind for me is a book called Ordering Your Private World by Gordon MacDonald. He talks about there are two kinds of leaders, of people in the world. There's driven people and called people. And he kind of self-declares that he's been a driven person much of his life, and goes through a list of things that I think every leader should read and check and so on. But the number one thing that I thought of when you said that from that list is just anger, actually. And I think that when you find yourself exploding at a situation, externally or internally even, something's gone haywire with your need for an outcome, your desire for perfection, your desire for control, something about your drivenness to accomplish that should be, I think, self-convicting, and it's definitely not in the list of the fruit of the Spirit, right? So I think that's, we're all imperfect people. That's going to happen from time to time, but it's a canary in the coal mine, I think.
Yeah, I think that the word, the emotion of that is, I think for me, sometimes also the thing I try to be on guard for is the pronouns of when so oftentimes in entrepreneurs, when you're telling their story, it's like my venture, my this, my that.
Yeah.
It's subtle.
Yeah.
But like when you hear it over and over and over again in a conversation, like, wait a second, like something's sliding here.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and I think that we have to be on guard for those small things. I mean, anger shows itself in different forms. You know, there's so many different faces to it, but it's a good reminder to us. I think the thing for me I'm wrestling with, maybe it's that doer in me, is like, what's that litmus test to really find out when that identity is misplaced.
Yeah.
I love that framework.
Yeah. That's so good. It's I think it really shapes how much we are able to hear other people too, when we're showing up with our emotion, our drivenness, our need to build in a particular direction, and versus the ability to say, okay, what's going on here, to see clearly, to have patience with people. And I always want to check myself too, to say like, how am I providing myself with more grace than I'm providing other people around me? And that can be a tough thing to look at times, but an important one.
That's good. In order to make sure that everybody that's listening and watching this kind of gets the full picture of it, could you just rattle through just kind of like top level, like what are some of the things as you guys have boiled it down?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as we talk about this as a moral ecology, right? The way we're trying to cultivate the Praxis community and the culture of it. I think, we talked about embodying the frame. We talked about our dominant identity being in the kingdom. I think we're also a community that really wants to embrace meaningful risk and support people who are doing that in a powerful way. I think that requires a certain, I'll call it eternal optimism, fighting off a lot of the forces of pessimism, cynicism, negativity that we see in our world today. I think that's connected to another one, which is really a bias to action instead of a bias to argument. We're in a world of hot takes, and it's a lot harder to build a venture that demonstrates something to the world than it is to, drop a soundbite that infuriates someone else out there, or just criticize someone who spent a lot of time creating. And so that's something we're definitely interested in. I think as we do that work, also when we value the venture at a very high level, it's also important to value the person at an even higher level. So we talk about putting people over projects, and really saying, okay, our board chair, Kurt Kylehacker, says that people are eternal and projects are temporal. And so how do we operationalize that? Whatever seat we're coming from, as a funder or a mentor, maybe someone with an equity stake in an enterprise, do we really say, oh, you know what, I care about this person more? When we see that lived out, it becomes a demonstrated apologetic in its own right, I think. So,
and I love that, and because there's been such an emphasis, I feel like, again, on what's being built or what's that conversation and how we're building inside. But it feels like that there's also this renewed emphasis on the founder, the entrepreneur, the person that feels alone and feels isolated. It feels like that there's just a more and more conversation of who are they becoming? Yeah. What is their identity? What's their wellness? Where are they coming from? It feels like it's kind of like three pieces to a stool here of like, what's the founder, the leader, that person, as you said, that's being criticized, kind of being that man in the arena. What's the model? Is it the redemptive side of it? And then also, what are some of the things and how you go about building that people are known for?
Yes.
But I love that focus, again, it's people, but it's oftentimes, I think we talk about people and we think about teams. But I think oftentimes as investors, we might skip past the wellness of the entrepreneur. Yeah. And you guys are really great at that piece to the puzzle.
Yeah, well, and I would point at, I think there are some investors who are really living this out well. I think of Jake Thompson at Sovereigns Capital. I think of Mark Phillips at 11 Tribes. People who are really innovating on what should we do with our 2% of our 2 and 20, and how can we bless the founders that we're working with. We talk, on the Redemptive framework a bit about this idea of game theory, and that at the redemptive edge, we say I sacrifice and we win. And I think there's something in that there. I think over the long haul, perhaps you can extract some value out of an entrepreneur by putting tremendous pressure on them. I wonder if that's only economic value you get versus cultural value. But for the the funder who wants a cultural outcome of importance and good and flourishing for the world to invest in the founder and who they are and their sustainability and their ability to make healthy decisions about other people, they can be just immediately blessed by a funder who has that sort of mentality and puts their money where their mouth is.
That's good. That's good. And I love the idea that like you've also built in like just this courageous idea of risk. That was another one that stood out to me as you were talking about that. Where do you feel like, I mean, it feels like risk, it's kind of like one of those words that says everything means everything, kind of some gray words. Like, how would you put flesh onto that idea of like, what does courageous risk look like?
Yeah, I think about risk across three categories. I think about the first one our minds go to so often is money. We say we want risk-adjusted reward in different ways. I wonder, I like to think about how that phrase works in the vocational land or even in eternal reward perspective. But that's obviously, it could be I'm going to go do a startup. I'm going to leave my well-paying job and risk salary. Or if I'm a funder, I'm going to put some money on something that I don't really know how it's going to work out. That is very real. And it's a very important part of the equation a lot of the times. But I actually think there's two other things that can be even more challenging for someone to risk. The second one would be comfort, I'll call it. I don't mean material comfort, though sure, that could be a part of it. It's more connected to the resource risk. But actually the privilege that we often experience of not having to do something that's hard. So many of us, probably most podcast listeners, have some safety net behind them, something that will allow them to take a conservative pathway of having a job and keeping a job, and that is tempting in some ways, right? It's the thing that's just sitting there, a life of ease. Not to say that those jobs aren't hard in their own right, but the security of those things, the simplicity of those things at times keeps us from stepping out into a greater difficulty, which is particularly important if we are taking on that greater difficulty for others, not just for our own risk-adjusted return. The third one I would say is beyond comfort is reputation. So particularly as we accomplish things in life, and this could be true for the 21-year-old Ivy League graduate as much as it could be true for the 60-year-old executive who's had an exit. We have to say, okay, what does it look like for me to potentially fail on this next project? And I think that maybe sits a couple levels down in our psyche, and we don't talk about it very often, but it's there. And it is, we're constantly telling ourselves, how much risk should I take with the exposure of my career, my LinkedIn, all these things to this social network, which it turns out is way more than the 4 people in my family or even the 100 people in my church. It's now the whole world that's looking in and saying, so tell me, what happened with that? And if we've had an up and to the right trajectory, which again could start with education, it could go to a great consulting firm or bank that you were a part of or whatever, all of a sudden when we actually should have more capacity to take risk and more safety net to fall back on, we actually become more averse to it. Just because of keeping that narrative alive. Sometimes it's the narrative we actually have been wanting to tell ourselves about our own life, that we're making it and that we're working it out. And so I think that's the work of the enemy. I think God would say, you're good. You're good. You've been fully accepted the moment you put yourself in the kingdom of God. Let's go try some things because the world needs you. And so I think that's that courageous risk that we should be pursuing.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's something that we see. Every lesson seems like that God's teaching you at this age. And when your kids are growing up in those teenage years, you're seeing it in them, you're seeing it in yourself. And it's that idea of risk. And oftentimes I think about it with my kids. It's like, I know in my heart it's good for them to fail. I know that God's teaching them in those moments when they struggle. But like then you see those moments, you're like, but then there's the reputational risk of watching your kids fail, and maybe it's in front of other people, and you're seeing that play out like right at the youngest of ages. And it's a challenge, I think, for us as entrepreneurs, risk takers, not only for our own, but even also for the next generation. Is like this could be a movement and a conversation of great generational risk. But as you see cycles of wealth and you see probably the similar correlation of a cycle of risk, is we're de-risking our kids.
Yeah.
And I'm fighting that here, like again, 16, 13, 11, saying like, you know what? This is good. This is hard. It's probably even harder because they don't even see what I see. They don't see the looks of this or that or friends or family. But it's the right thing to keep that re-risking.
Yeah.
You just think that like, so oftentimes we think of the struggle and we're like, oh man, to break through on the other side. And we think it's peace and beauty and comfort on the other side. But in fact, I think it's actually, that's where the distraction and the danger is. But it's in the struggle itself. It's in the risking itself when we're most connected to God in that journey.
Yeah.
Faith-driven entrepreneur for teens. You want your teen to pursue success and live with significance. But in a world fueled by greed and self-promotion, they need a better story than what social media sells. Here's the good news. There's a growing movement of faith-driven entrepreneurs using business to solve real problems, serve others, and point to God in every decision. In Faith-Driven Entrepreneur for Teens, Kobe Cotton, Lecrae, and David Platt take students on a global journey, spotlighting real builders in media, tech, real estate, music, and more. In partnership with Pat Lencioni's Working Genius, students discover their God-given strengths, expand their imagination, and spark conversations about life beyond high school. Help your teen dream bigger and build a life of purpose. Learn more about Faith-Driven Entrepreneur for Teens. Visit faithdrivenentrepreneurforteens.org.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things that I'm struggling with as a parent,
Oh man.
seeing that happen.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple things come to mind there. I think first is for the Christian founder. I think this is my hypothesis. It's my story too. Part of our longing and love of looking back at those early days when we started something was the real raw dependence on God.
Yeah.
Where we were like, is this going to work?
Yeah.
Like, God, I need you. And I think we go back to that well, hopefully on a regular basis, even when it's not acute. But there is a beautiful thing about that, where risk puts us relative to our faith.
Yeah.
I thought, as you talk about being a parent, me as well, three boys, and I thought a little bit about, Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind, and one of the kind of research projects in there that he references is related to the changing of size of radius with which parents are willing to let their kids take their bike out in our world today.
Okay. All right.
And it used to be like, hey, don't get hurt and stay in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I need to see you,
Yeah.
basically. If I can see you, it's cool. And that's, an attitude towards risk that in his calculus is a miscalculation of what risk is out there in the world and what the costs are of that control and prevention and visibility. And we're, I think, at risk as parents of doing that with our children's vocations as well, and how we encourage them. And we're all at risk of doing that with our vocations, frankly, and saying like, as long as I can see where this is going and it kind of makes sense to everybody, then we can step into that next thing, versus, sometimes it's a hard pivot or a big exploration that everyone says is a little crazy. I mean, we actually just heard this from one of the presenters at our conference, and they were saying how every one of their friends said, hey, you should not take this risk. And it was a very important, critical decision for the future of their lives. Their friends just didn't want to see them leave the community.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't know what the other factors that are part of that conversation too, is like that we put on that. And I think that, I love that we're talking about our kids, because I think that the competitive marketplace of conversation and ideas of this, it's not one of those things that we can wait on. Yeah. Like, it's not one of those things that like, oh, let's figure out the morality piece, figure out this. Yeah, you'll go off to college and then you'll figure it out. But like, when you see the creator economy then coming into the rooms of like 11, 12, 13-year-old YouTube videos, and I mean, my daughter, they have social media influencers in their school that are making real money off of it. And you're seeing this right in the middle of it. You're recognizing this idea of creating the identity piece where we started this conversation. Like, that's at the forefront of like, why are you creating? Are you creating for you, for your fame, for your identity, for your whatever it is? And then it's also this risk conversation of like, we've got to define it like any other of these things, like money or whatever it is. This is a part of the equation of the Christian faith.
Yeah.
Like risk is a part of it. It's not void of it. It's a pretty boring life without it.
Yeah.
But gosh, it takes you through a whirlwind of emotions in the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you look back at the year, other things, just kind of things that you're summarizing, just kind of like the state of things that you're seeing in the movement. What are some other things that stand out?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think it's an exciting time because anytime there is, anytime people are facing problems and challenges and surprises and uncertainty and complexity, as long as that's not coming directly from the church, I think it's an opportunity for the church. And so how do we step into that? How do we say, oh, here's what's going on. Let's be a bit of antithesis. Let's drive up our ability to be present with people in a time where they're not even often present in the workplace. So much of us have remote teams. I know you and I both lead hybrid remote teams. And so how do we make sure that we're investing in the people in our neighborhood, the people in our church, the people in our organizations too, bringing them together, which I know we both try to do very intentionally. So those just create new opportunity areas. And I am a eternal optimist, guilty as charged. And I just think, okay, well, let's make the most of this moment. Let's see what there is to do, because there's always something to do, versus sort of stepping back and saying, gosh, this creates paralysis for us. We don't, we're not sure what to do, so let's not do anything until we know. That's I think a form of risk aversion as well.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think that turning points, hinge moments, technology, whatever it is that brings it about, as you said, it can be uncertain, but it is a moment for light to break through. It's a chance for that to stand out in the marketplace of ideas. And it's uncomfortable, but we've got to wade into it together. And I think the thing that I love as we kind of come to a close here is just this idea of, as this conversation goes broader, we've got to be clearer in the pruning and defining of like what this means and what it doesn't. We've got to identify some of these codes, these conversations, not in a entirely rigid way, but we have to know what is redemptive entrepreneurship, faith-driven entrepreneurship, whatever the language might be, but what also it isn't.
Yeah.
Because there's been a surge of momentum. There's been a fun surge of conversation, but it's also one of those moments, I think, when conversations pick up momentum, that it can come to mean something deep, or it can be something you kind of bumper sticker and feel inoculated to.
Sure.
And really miss the thing behind the thing that God's calling us to.
Yeah. That's well said. And I mean, just to riff on your language there a bit, I think one of my deeper hopes is that all faith-driven entrepreneurship would be redemptive entrepreneurship. That there would not be a gap between the idea that we can, separate our faith and our work. We can be a Christian and then do our work, and that when we're driven by our faith, it has to manifest itself in the walk of Jesus. And I think that's the great opportunity for the depth that those connect. Not just at the language level, but at the day-to-day practice level. There's such a powerful thing there and this just goes back to the top of us practicing what we preach, right? If people know that we are Christians, if we're saying, hey, I'm a faith-driven entrepreneur, and then they encounter that redemptive practice, it says, wow, okay, these people are real. This is an authentic representation of faith. And I think that is, again, the big opportunity that we're seeing people be open to, who before didn't. They would. I think we, just a few years ago, we were in a time where Christian entrepreneurship, faith-driven entrepreneurship, any of these terms were potentially risky, risky in a different way to bring up in a workplace, to talk about, particularly in a place like Silicon Valley or New York, a tech hub.
I mean, real risk. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that the Mozilla type of side of things, and we featured that in some of his story. But as you said, the Overton window has shifted. The things that were risky are now a little bit more normative.
Yeah.
how does that change us, like in this moment, like when we see this?
Yeah.
I know we're launching off into kind of like a whole nother conversation here, but like,
Yeah.
like what are some of those things that, where's the risky edge?
Yeah. Well, I think what it opens up a new risk in a sense. That's a negative one, which is, I think there's a chance anytime the door opens up for us or a Overton window shifts that we say, oh man, we've felt exploited for so long by not being able to say this, or feeling like there was a cultural cost to it, that now we're going to exploit people who are in our workplaces, and we're just going to put it everywhere, and it's going to be this thing that we're almost pushing down on folks. That's sort of a return to, I think, a day that we don't want to go back to as Christian leaders, where people felt like, gosh, if I don't know how to talk the talk around here, I can't get a promotion or something like that. That's not a good pathway. What it does open the door for, though, is for us to again connect how we practice, what we preach, and we can say, hey, here's why I'm doing this thing, and hopefully even people can experience it before they hear about it, or at least at the same time. We can say, like, what was that? Why did you do that? That's a strange decision. Tell me about that. So, well, I'm trying to, work this out in a redemptive way. That's really meaningful to me, and purpose. That's part of why I'm doing this. That's those redemptive moves as conversation starters when they're authentic. Is a beautiful thing that we should step all the way into.
I love that. I think there's always times, I think, as entrepreneurs, right? You hear it in conversation, and it's like, when necessary, use words. It's like, gosh, it's pretty necessary. Like, I mean, there's brokenness all around us.
Anytime we're St. Francis, if I'm St. Francis, then maybe I don't need to use words.
There you go. But like, it's just like we hide behind that sometimes. And I think what I don't want to be lost is it's necessary for us to step to the plate. It's necessary for us to use those words. But I think that what we've learned over the last 20, 30 years is like, there's a winsome way of engaging in conversation that, I love what you said, that is marked by authenticity, that is so different from something that feels like old boiler room prescripted speech and talking points of like what it is. And I hope that's something that we take away from this moment, is step into the moment to take risks, to have conversation, to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone, but to do it in ways that are winsome, that are inviting. That's so much of what I love about the redemptive language, is it's just so natural, and it fits into that conversation with believers and unbelievers alike, that really brings about like curiosity for people to ask, what's behind that? And so it's fun to see.
That's great.
Always great to be together.
Likewise.
Well, friends, great to be with you guys as always. A couple of things that I'd love to really encourage you with as you guys are taking away from today's episodes. One, get in community, get in conversation. People and friends that aren't going to encourage you to de-risk, but that are encouraging you to re-risk. And so if you're early stage and you're thinking about ways to build, I would highly encourage you to check out the Praxis website. Hear about the cohorts, hear about the groups, hear about the conversations that they have meeting in cities, that they have meeting in regions, different ways that you might plug into thinking about opportunities to get involved. As a reminder, guys, this is part one of a two-part episode. Today was fun to talk about this moral ecology. What are some of the things that mark us as a community and as a movement and as a conversation as we think about redemptive ways to build? Next week, we get to talk about some of the things that Dave was alluding to at the end, this hinge moment that we're in, and how do we see it as an opportunity, and not something to run from, but something to push into. And so Andy Crouch is going to be here talking about this moment, breaking it down for us. I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys next week on that episode.
Come for content, stay for community. Join a faith-driven entrepreneur group online or in person. No cost, no catch. Visit faithdrivenentrepreneur.org. That's faithdrivenentrepreneur.org.